Hi everyone, in this recording I'm going to be speaking about the astrology of the present moment and of course this upcoming full moon in the sign of Aquarius taking place either on the 23rd or 24th of July depending on which side of the planet you're on. Now before we begin, I have to mention what is going on in the sky in the present moment because these aspects are definitely going to lead up to this upcoming full moon, which can represent a really powerful emotional, mental, intellectual, and even social culmination of the present moment energies. And of course, like every single full moon, regardless of where it takes place in the sky, this also has really strong revelatory qualities, as in shedding light to something which was hidden from our awareness, or a secret coming out, or something that we were not able to see, perceive correctly. Maybe we didn't have the right perceptions, the right opening, so to speak. This is where a full moon has a certain karmic energy, where everything that we need to be aware of suddenly, perhaps unexpectedly, just becomes clear to us, that much more obvious, and we can focus on it. And because the sign of Aquarius is all about information, interhuman connections, everything basically that builds up society, a community, a network of people, for example. It is also very strong intellectual, cerebral, visionary, future-oriented energy, so there is a lot of creativity attached to it. Because, intellectual power has to be used in a very creative and, let's say, experimental way in order for it to become something very palpable in the future. But at the same time, Aquarius can also be a very, very rebellious freedom fighter energy. So, it really, really depends how we use the blessing of this full moon. Because I do believe that this energy can have two almost contradictory expressions. For some people, it is definitely going to represent a really powerful emotional trigger. Not just necessarily because of the full moon, but rather because of other aspects happening in the sky. But this is where the full moon is almost like a catalyst, because it always pulls our emotions to the surface, almost forcing us to confront them. And if those emotions are more rebellious, one of the expressions of Aquarius, well, that will definitely turn into anger, into impulsivity, into very radical choices, decisions, actions, communication, what we share on social media. So this is one of the most primordial expressions of this energy, where people are definitely going to be really, really triggered, really angry, but at the same time highly motivated to fight for whatever they believe in. So this will definitely have protest, social unrest, political chaos attached to it. But a totally different kind of expression has to do with the higher qualities of Aquarius. Deep philosophy, deep contemplation, trying to use our highest thinking, our highest cerebral processes in very practical ways to upgrade our lives. So this means that we are going to take a look at the truth of how this world change affected our lives, how it transformed our everyday normality, and more importantly, the sign of Aquarius, how it influenced our futures. And when I say influenced our futures, we have to take into consideration every action, every choice, every compromise that we decided to take, or perhaps we were forced to take because of the global situation, rules, regulations, restrictions, and all of that. So basically, how we adapted to it personally And another side is how all those things which do not depend on us, which we do not have power over, influenced and changed our everyday normality. And that ultimately means that the future already means something totally different for us personally than it has meant, let's say, 2 or maybe 3 years ago. And of course, by, thinking about this, because Aquarius is a very, very intellectual, head-based energy. So, evoking all these thoughts and trying to see our own unique, individual, distinctive patterns that played out is ultimately going to trigger emotional responses. Because, a full moon means an opposition of the sun and moon, and the sun illuminates the moon from the sign of Leo, so heart, our own emotional distinctiveness. So basically this is going to be a moment when thought meets emotion, and we can draw some very important conclusions about how it is that we personally, individually, are going to be navigating towards our futures. But at the same time, Aquarius is all about society, other people, our friends, our connections, our place in our community as well. So it's not just about our own uniqueness and individuality, but that also has to be in harmony, whatever that harmony means for us personally, with, other people, everyone else in our lives. But of course, even if this plays out for us personally, just as a more philosophical, truth-seeking, introspective energy, this can be truly helpful and empowering, because when we are more aligned with our truth, with our purpose, with our individuality, we stand from a place of acceptance and, of course, Leo, love, with our life stories, with everything that makes us who it is that we are, and more importantly, everything that makes us stand out from other people. Now that has a very strong psychological effect, because it can give us a much stronger magnetism when both the mind, our thoughts, our way of thinking, our unique thought processes collaborate with our emotions, what it is that we desire, what is our heart-based truth, so to speak. Well, that can be a massive game changer, because we can symbolically see the sign of Aquarius as our personal rocket, and the sign of Leo, the sun being in its home sign of Leo, as fuel, as very, very strong power source, and the combustion that is needed to ignite the fuel. And when these two come together and align, in opposition, yes, it is a hard aspect, but ultimately it provides equilibrium and balance. So when these two align, it can just quantum leap us, propulse us, take us where we need to be, or at least closer to where we need to be. So this is a really, really strong emotional, intellectual, and even spiritual empowerment. Now, it is without a doubt that for most people out there, this will rather turn into the more angry, primitive, instinctual expression, where they're going to be fueled by extreme anger, rage, inability to tolerate anymore. And of course, we have all the fears, we have all the chaos, all the conflict, all the diverging, even contradictory visions, points of view, even within the scientific community, even between people and groups who represent the same side, kind of. If there is a lot of contradiction and battle and, dichotomy even in people representing the same side, well, you can imagine how strong the chaos is in the present moment. So we can't even blame anyone for reacting in a more assertive, in a more angrier manner than usual. And of course, let's not forget that the moon is, especially when we take a look at the astrology of the collective, the moon is the overall feeling of the people, their emotional charge, their emotional state basically. And Aquarius is exactly the people themselves, the communities, the interhuman connections, the solidarity between people. Yes, of course, even the differences, but the differences are already between groups and not necessarily individuals. So you can imagine that this will trigger the groups, the collective, people as a unity. So how this will play out in some parts of the world, or better said, most parts of the world, is very straightforward. Protest, rebellion, revolution, legal battles, mediatic battles. This is where there is a very big chance for the freedom of speech to be censored, to be restricted. We may not possibly be able to share, communicate, express our opinions freely. And that will really, really trigger people. And they will do everything in their power in order to fight for freedom, for equality, everything that the sign of Aquarius stands for. But I'll be speaking a little bit more about this full moon and what it might represent in a little bit, because right now I would just like to mention what is happening in the sky right now preceding this full moon. And we have a really, really strong yet subtle energy at play, where the main theme is breakthrough, more importantly, personal breakthrough. And of course, what with? Well, this is where what is the most urgent and what is the most important for each person individually in their lives right now. Some people may be really, really focused on solving a problem, an obstacle, harmonizing, fixing, healing, regenerating, or maybe starting from scratch one area of their lives. For other people, it's more emotional, for others, spiritual, for others, job related. It doesn't really matter, but this is where, at least in one area of our lives, all of us will almost feel like it is absolutely imperative to achieve a breakthrough, almost like our lives, our futures, our survival, our distinctiveness, for us to be able to be the person who we are depends on this. But this may come through as a very subtle energy. The feelings may be extremely high, but they are more like our instincts just activating, our instincts just telling us to take action, to fight, to do everything that we need. And of course, what is possible, what we can, to achieve a breakthrough, an evolution, to change our situations into something that can give us at least a fighting chance to survive with dignity, to survive in our own terms and conditions. This doesn't necessarily mean to get our way or the highway, but rather to find a balance, even if it has to do with a compromise, surrendering, being more tolerant, being more acceptive of different standards than our own. Whatever this may mean, we still need to take some actions or find a path, a way, a modus operandi, or maybe a help, someone out there who can actually help us make our situations just a little bit better, just tolerable, so that we can function according to who it is that we are, our own individuality. But as I say, this might not be a very conscious, a very rational energy. This might just be an inner impulse. Yet this impulse is extremely strong. And why? Well, we have a cardinal grand cross in the sky, and that is one of the most intense aspects possible, because it's cardinal, and that means we need to initiate something, we need to take action, we need to start a certain kind of chain reaction of cause and effect, but we need to take the first step, we need to make the first gesture, we need to initialize this, because otherwise, even if, let's say, the whole of the universe is prepared to support us, it cannot until we do a specific gesture or take a specific action, a choice. May it be like something very down to earth, like a communication, asking something, doing something, applying for something, or may it be metaphysical or something which has to do with our own psychology, inner work, magic, for example. And let's see what planets hold this cardinal grand cross. And as I say, this is one of the most tensioned aspects possible, yet two of the power players is a planetoid, so it is a relatively new symbolism in astrology, but that doesn't mean that the power it has is ignorable, because one of the key players is Pluto, and whenever Pluto is involved in any astrological conversation, there is a lot of power, especially psychological power, psychological influence, which transforms, which changes, which reveals something which was previously hidden from our sights or buried deep in our unconscious. So Pluto from the sign of Capricorn opposes the Sun in Cancer, but at the same time, the planetoid Eris, goddess of discord, opposes planetoid Haumea in the sign of Libra. And of course, these planets are also squared to each other. So Eris squares Pluto, Haumea squares Pluto, Eris squares Sun, Haumea squares the Sun. And this is how the Grand Cross is formed. Fortunately, this is a short-term aspect, because the Sun is going to be moving very quickly out of position, and it will break the Grand Cross off. Yet the Eris and Pluto square is going to be ongoing all throughout 2021, even the first half of 2022. So that energy is here to stay, but this was with us ever since 2019. So how this plays out is no longer a secret or a mystery. It is pure assertive power where people just take to the streets and demand their rights. That is basically Eris. And even though Haumea is a planetoid associated with nurture, with magic, with the divine feminine, with the power of love, emotional support, nurture, and in the sign of Libra, this is basically the glue that holds relationships together, or any kind of partnership, any kind of association. When she is opposing Eris in the sign of Eris, well, this symbolism is very clear. You know, Haumea in Libra, all of us desire peace, all of us desire harmony, all of us desire equilibrium, equality, to have the most harmonious connections, relationships in our lives. May they be spiritual, may they be work, contracts, partnerships, or any kind of one-on-one alliance. Of course, we desire those to be full of love, full of respect, full of mutual understanding and compassion. But before we can have that, sometimes we have to fight for peace. And that is Eris in the sign of Aries squaring Pluto, where if peace and harmony and beautiful, mutually nurturing connections between people are kind of threatened, blocked, limited, or influenced in a very, very negative way by whatever is happening on the world stage. Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn is basically world stage. It is social hierarchy, the power of our leaders, governments, our organized hierarchy has over us. Now, if all of that threatens the loving nature of our connections and relationships, You can imagine that in our own unique individual ways, all of us are gonna fight for that which we love, that which makes us happy. In other words, peace. And this is where, of course, some people are going to fight in a very physical way, as in taking to the streets, or legally, for example, or through sharing information or being part of certain groups. But other people are going to fight with exactly the symbolism of Humia, setting intention, tapping into the most primordial power of a human being, the power of will, the power of focus, the power of intent. And even though this energy can be very frustrating, it can come through as impatience, as no longer being able to tolerate a condition, a state of being which you feel as not authentically reflecting your inner reality, so to speak. That is always very uncomfortable, yet this is where it can turn into pure psychological, better said, the power of the unconscious, where if our desire, if our will, if our intent is as supported, fueled by every part of our being, mind, heart, higher self, the soul, the physical self, so everything that makes up our being in one package, well, that is such a powerful alchemical combination that it will just force even outer reality to find a way, to find the right quantum openings, if this makes sense, to bring what you desire, your intention to you, as it's possible, of course. But with Pluto in the picture, this is where we cannot program our modus operandi, so to speak, how we would like things to play out with precision into the universe, because this aspect is so very chaotic. And if that wasn't enough, it takes place under the Saturn-Uranus square. So this is where we must understand that we have no power or influence over how everything is going to come together. So having precise expectations or trying to program the universe with dates and specifics is not gonna help us, but rather this is where we just know what we want. We can surrender the modus operandi and specifics to the universe and just focus attracting that which we urgently, and as I said, this is urgent, this is immediate, that which we urgently need to have in our lives, regardless of what that is. So right now we are likely to perceive this energy as a strong physical fatigue, where we can almost feel that our physical energies, our stamina, our vitality is just almost like sucked up by our cores, by the soul, while at the same time our inner fire just grows and grows, even if we perceive it as impatience, even as, impulsivity, as frustration. That is already a clear sign that our being is storing energy for a very important purpose, and that purpose might become very obvious to us exactly at the full moon. So basically this cardinal grand cross is just preparing us energetically and also psychologically for us to have an energetic reservoir which we can expand at the time of the full moon, either consciously or instinctually. Now let's get back to this full moon in Aquarius, which happens on the 23rd or 24th of the month, depending on where you are on the planet, at 1 degree and 26 minutes of the sign of Aquarius. And this is kind of important because this is where last year, 2020, 21st of December, the Saturn and Jupiter conjunction took place opening a new paradigm of the next 20 years and also the next 200 years by placing the energy into air. The great conjunctions of this next 200 years are gonna take place predominantly in air signs, and Aquarius is the first air sign to open this cycle. And where the moon is exactly conjunct 0 degrees of this sign, where, as I said earlier, December's great conjunction took place. So for all of us, both collectively and individually, it will be a moment of revelation of how that great conjunction already changed our lives, how it transformed our everyday normality, and most importantly, our worldviews, our life philosophies, and our perception. So this, without a doubt, this will raise discussions about the predominance of technology, how it influenced our lives, where things are headed towards scientifically and technologically speaking. Of course, there will be a lot of opposition where some people, groups of people, will say that we have gone a little bit too far. Technology is dehumanizing us already. So, this will definitely reflect on the world stage as some kind of contradictory discussions, opinions, theories. There will also be discussions about freedom and equality, what these mean in a post-COVID era. And of course, Aquarius symbolizes the internet. So what kind of impact everything that has been taking place has on the freedom of communication, sharing, and speech on the internet. Another important aspect is that the moon holds an outer sign conjunction with Pluto, and of course that means that there is also an out sign opposition that the sun holds with Pluto. And this is important going back to the 12th of January 2020, where the Saturn and Pluto conjunction took place. So this basically invites us to contemplate and reflect about how much power is it healthy to give over, surrender to our leaders, to society. And of course, a totally different viewpoint is, what does society, our leaders, the social structure, so to speak, how much sacrifice do they demand of us for our safety, for our well-being, etc.? Are we okay to sacrifice our freedom, our time, basically moments from our lives that no one is gonna give back to us, just for the sheer sake of feeling safe, which can also be an illusion one way or another? So these are the themes that this is gonna raise, and as I said, both collectively and also individually, we're going to be contemplating about all of these. Now, the ruling planet of this full moon is without a doubt both Uranus and Saturn, and these two big power players are fighting each other, they're in conflict. And I've talked about this in so very many horoscopes, in with the new, out with the old. So from a certain perspective, this Saturn and Uranus square is gonna reflect in our lives one way or another. And this is exactly why the big picture of this energy is determining us to find a solution to our most urgent problems, or those things in our lives which limit us, because we need to, like it or not, step into our futures already and start working, building, planning, finding the right connections, or simply living it. And if that means having to detach from certain things which always used to provide us with a certain kind of security or comfort, may it be our friends, our social circle, institutions, a certain value system that we always embraced, or simply our faith, our spirituality, whatever in our lives, gave us a Saturnian kind of comfort and sense of security. Like, let me just give you an example. Some people had this mindset which was extremely correct, at least in my personal opinion. If you want something, if you desire something, if you need something, go and work for it. Work means to put in the effort, the sacrifice, the time. It may not necessarily have to mean like the standard acceptance of what work is, like a job, etc. So if one fulfills Saturn's requirements to put in the effort, to put in the energy, the time, or the sacrifice, of course, naturally, that person would sooner or later get what they worked for. But what if right now this principle, which should be universal, is not really working because of unloyal tactics which were not just allowed to exist, for example, in fair trade, in work ethics, or how big companies, for example, compete with smaller businesses, whatever this means. If unfair tactics were not just accepted, but promoted, protected, legalized, well, that ultimately means that the moral acceptance of what is tolerable, what is and what is not, also transformed. So in the collective consciousness, lies, deception, manipulation, and I say unfair competition, unfair tactics, which basically nullify the principle of if you want something, go out and sacrifice for it, invest, work for it, and you'll get it, which basically is the normal, it is the fair, it is the morally acceptable principle. Well, you can imagine that this already changes reality itself and how the flow of material energies and transaction work out in the world. And basically what I'm saying is that any person who just wants to work for something that they want to have or need, regardless of the nature, well, that person will find themselves be unsuccessful the vast majority of times when they try. And why? Well, it is very simple. If collective consciousness promotes unfair tactics, lies, manipulations, in the sense of like beautiful adverts, promoters who just say what is needed to be said, empty promises, and of course the way import is killing the local economy. So everything that has to do with the moral principles that basically govern our society. So this is what is going to stir a powerful reaction, a powerful opposition and anger, because all of this, how unfair business and trade and even employment and the way someone's career plays out, someone's business, etc. plays out. So all this unfairness is definitely not going to be tolerated anymore. And people will either protest, but the smartest of them will simply withdraw from this. Withdraw all their energies. Of course, some people might, choose rather desperate gestures, as in not be part of any of this anymore in a radical way, like they might simply stop buying anything from big chains, big companies, and they will just try to replace this with any other source they can. So basically to starve the titans. But at the end of the day, all of this is meant for these individuals to be able to express their own uniqueness and distinctiveness in a very authentic and realistic way. we must not forget that that is the core essence of Aquarius, regardless of how we look at it. And at the end of the day, Aquarius is all about our minds, our thoughts, our intellectual power. So when our way of thinking and the way we use the power of our minds to do many things in life, when that changes, well, very surely everything changes afterwards. And just after the full moon, we are going to have another celestial conversation which just energizes all of this in a very, very intense and even karmic way, because we have a grand fire trine, the galactic center from 27 degrees of Sagittarius, and the galactic center is the symbol of pure divine creational energy, where the divine works through us, through our beliefs, so to speak. And when I say belief, this doesn't really mean spiritual or religious. It just means our core beliefs about the self, life, and everything in it. And then there is Eris in the sign of Aries. This is all about our sovereignty, the individuality that all of us possess, and we need to protect that, of course. It is also a warrior energy. It is basically the seat of our instincts. It is the head in general. And last but not least, we have Mars, planet of action, the male principle, the energizer, in the fiery sign of Leo, where whatever our heart wants and desires, well, we can have the courage and the inner strength for it. And when these three planets and areas of life are connected with each other through a harmonious fire trine, well, you can imagine that that is almost a divine infusion of courage, willpower, and everything that we need to obtain success. And success is the key word here, because that is what Eris really wants. If we take a look at the symbolism and mythology of Eris, well, she fights for truth, she fights for freedom and sovereignty, but not in the classical way. She fights with chaos, and basically she can bring down any opponent even when she has almost no chance, even when she is outnumbered, outplayed, out-tacticked. She can always find a way to bring down that which might normally be unbeatable. So she actually specializes in situations when she is greatly against the odds. Now let me give you an example with the story of Eris. She got offended because there was a huge wedding in Olympus and she wasn't invited, and she decided to turn up anyway because she wanted her truth, she wanted her revenge. And you can imagine that any offensive action against an army of gods would have led her absolutely nowhere, regardless of how strong she would have been or what kind of cosmic power she would have tapped into. She still faced an army of beings who had the same potential as her, basically. So instead of fighting directly, she knew the truth. She fought with the truth, which was that gods and divine beings do have a lot of vanity and arrogance in their hearts. So she just threw a golden apple in the crowd and said, "To the fairest." And that immediately triggered all of the other goddesses, because who is the fairest? How do you judge that? And very quickly it became a big conflict, and of course the family members of every goddess got involved, like it or not, and this led to the Trojan War. So this is Eris's modus operandi, when she kind of fights with a truth that her adversaries don't want to confront. So exactly the symbolism of Pluto. So this is why this can be a moment, a very powerful karmic moment, when because of the energies of this full moon, and of course previously the Grand Cardinal Cross, we might find ourselves be triumphant or achieving victory in ways which we never even thought imaginable. All we need to do is listen to our instincts, listen to our inner voice, especially when that chooses to do something which is totally outside our comfort zones, exactly the Saturn and Uranus square. So even though there is chaos in the air, things could get really, really interesting. And again, I say, we might find ourselves in a much better or way more superior tactical position in life or in any other area of life than we could have ever imagined. So my advice for this full moon and the weekend is, it's gonna be chaotic on the world stage, it's gonna be full chaos on social media, any media channel. There is gonna be a lot of political, legal conflict out there, who's right, who's wrong. So rather than choosing a side and supporting one version or the other, just detach totally and immerse yourself in your own situation, in your specific life story, and rather than to squander your energy by supporting a side, a principle, a theory, a philosophical view, just choose yourself and invest all the power of your belief into yourself, in your own story, and with everything that you need to achieve in your life right now. And that will definitely get you much, much more further than if you'd be choosing to support something that's already at play out there. Well, this concludes today's analysis. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, bye for now.